So let's talk about Mexico. On one hand, you see this incredible economic energy, right? It's a manufacturing powerhouse, totally plugged into the global economy. But on the other hand, it's grappling with these really deep, persistent challenges in development and security. And that's the central paradox we're going to unpack today. How can so much dynamism exist alongside so much struggle? Let's break it down.
Now, if you just look at the surface, the numbers look amazing. We're talking about remittances. That's the money sent home by migrants. And for 10 years in a row, they've hit a record high. I mean, this is an explosion of cash that's been a critical lifeline for millions of families. But, as we're about to see, this huge tidal wave of money, it might be hiding something a lot more complicated.
And yeah, that brings us right to the heart of the matter. With all these billions of dollars pouring in, why are so many communities still facing these enormous problems? The answer, and this is key, isn't just a lack of money. It's about the very structure of the system itself.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to look at three things that are all connected. First, we'll follow the money and see what we're calling the fiscal straitjacket. Then we'll dig into how the state itself has been reconfigured. And finally, we'll look at the brutal consequences of it all, what we're calling a violent coexistence.
All right, let's dive into part one, the money. If you really want to understand Mexico's biggest challenges, you've got to follow the cash. And maybe more importantly, you have to see where it gets stuck.
Okay, so here's the absolute heart of the problem. Almost all the money goes to the top. A staggering 94.3% of all tax revenue is collected by the federal government. Think about that for a second. That leaves the states with just over 4%, and the municipalities, the local governments closest to the people, with a measly 1.6%. It basically starves local communities of the cash they need for everything: good policing, fixing roads, you name it.
So what this means is that your local government, the one that's supposed to handle all the day-to-day stuff, has practically zero financial independence. They're completely dependent on getting money sent down from the capital. And this setup leaves them incredibly weak, with very little real power to solve local problems on their own terms.
And it doesn't stop there. There's another huge constraint on the economy, and it's summed up in this number, 60%. Any guesses what that could be? That's the chunk of the entire workforce that's in the informal economy. We're talking 60% of working people with no formal benefits, and, this is the really important part, they're not really part of the tax system. This puts a hard ceiling on public investment. It traps the country in this cycle of low taxes, which means low investment in public goods. And believe me, this isn't the only complicated money flow we need to talk about.
Which brings us right back to those remittances we mentioned earlier, because that feel-good story has a really strange twist. And it starts with this number, 585%. That is a massive red flag.
So check this out. It's called the Minnesota anomaly. Between 2018 and 2022, remittances coming from just that one state shot up by 585%. But here's the thing. Minnesota is home to only half of 1% of the entire Mexican origin population in the US. The amount of money sent, we're talking $4.7 billion, was basically the same as the entire estimated annual income of every single person of Mexican origin living in that state. It's just not possible. Now, the official story blames a technical glitch, mislabeled data servers. But here's the kicker. In that exact same time frame, the number of transactions with an unknown origin jumped by over 330%. What that strongly suggests is that the whole remittance system is being hijacked to hide industrial-scale money laundering.
Okay, so just to recap, we've got a system with these major fiscal choke points and some really suspicious money flowing around. Now let's see how all of that feeds into an even deeper problem. The way the state itself is actually being reshaped or reconfigured by criminal influence.
To really get what's going on here, we need to talk about a new idea. You've probably heard the term state capture, right? That's when powerful groups try to influence laws from the top down for their own benefit. But what's happening in many parts of Mexico is something deeper. It's called co-opted state reconfiguration. And this isn't just about trying to influence the state. It's about fundamentally changing it and taking over its core functions from the inside out.
Basically, this is when groups like cartels don't just bribe a few officials. They fundamentally alter how an entire area is governed. They start providing services, they enforce their own rules, they even try to get the local population on their side. In effect, they become a kind of parallel state. The crucial point here is that they literally morph the system to serve their own criminal enterprise.
So how on earth does this even happen? Well, this quote points to a really critical weakness. For decades, political parties have,
pretty much on purpose, created weak local governments. They packed these municipal bureaucracies with low-skilled jobs, not to get things done, but to build these huge patronage networks, handing out favors to make sure people stay loyal. It's something called the bureaucratic trap.
And that trap has an absolutely devastating consequence. It creates local governments that are basically designed to fail at solving complex problems. So when the official state can't provide basic security or create economic opportunity, what happens? It creates a power vacuum. And that's a vacuum that criminal groups with all their money and guns are more than happy to step in and fill.
And this all leads us to our final part, because the real-world result of this fiscally starved, reconfigured state, well, it's a grim and incredibly violent reality. And it's especially dangerous for anyone who dares to get involved in local politics.
So let's start with another really stark number, 71%. And this number directly connects the weakness of the state to the violence on the ground.
That's the percentage of all political violence in Mexico that happens at the municipal level. Not at the federal level, not the state level, but local. And this is no accident. The violence is concentrated in the exact same place where the state is the weakest, the most starved for cash, and the most fragile.
And the scale of this violence is just staggering. Take a look at this number, 1,709. That's how many attacks, we're talking murders, assassination attempts, threats, were carried out against politicians and government officials in just a 6-year period, from 2018 to early 2024.
And look at who's being targeted. It is overwhelmingly local. Of all the politicians who've been murdered, a staggering 81% were either running for or already holding a municipal office. Mayors, city council members, people like that.
So we have to be crystal clear about this. This is not just random crime that happens to spill over into politics. No, this is a systematic, strategic campaign of violence. Criminal groups target these local officials because that is the most direct, most effective way to take over, to reconfigure the state from the ground up, guaranteeing they can operate however they want.
And this quote, I think, just perfectly sums up the core problem. It ties everything we've talked about together: the weak finances, the reconfigured state, and the violence. In most countries, results create the story. But in Mexico, there's a real risk that the story is being used to create the appearance of results. When the actual institutions can't deliver, there's this huge pressure to just create a good narrative instead. And that points to a deep, deep institutional crisis that a simple fix won't solve.
Which leaves us with one last critical question to think about. When a state's very structure is set up in a way that creates these vacuums of power, and we've seen how that happens with centralized funding and weak local governments, what's going to fill that void? The tragedy in Mexico today is that we have a very clear and very violent answer to that question.